Welcome, everyone, thank you for all coming to our 2020 World Mental Health Day panel event. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands and airways we're meeting today. Pay my respects to elders past and present. We are here in Cambry getting its name from the local Ngunnawal Ngambri people as a meeting place for millennia, and it is great that we are able to meet here in that tradition today. 2020 has been the hardest year for many of us. It has forced us to change so many integral parts of our lives, both personal and in work. This also includes the impact on our mental health. I know that I have struggled this year too, more than any other time in my life, if I'm honest. Everyone is impacted differently, but it is so important to make sure that we all take the time to look after ourselves. And I think even more importantly, look around in the community around us, because that is where we can do good as well as just thinking about ourselves. I've found the need to take some time off throughout the year, continually just taking bits and pieces along the way, where it gives me a chance to kind of decompress and think about the big things of life. It allows me to put down the emotional and stress baggage, allows me to reflect on what's going on with a much clearer mind. I also find it means I don't clench my jaw and I sleep better at night. Those are the things that I think all of us are going through. This crisis has been kind of unique because whether or not you're running a university or part of the university, it's stressful in very similar ways for all of us, and I recognize that. So I do encourage everyone to take a break, even if it's just a few hours, to do something that gives you comfort, peace of mind, and clarity. It's also important to talk about it, and I think I'm a little disconcerting because my team knows they know how I'm feeling. I talk about it in the office all the time. I'm like, I'm sorry, I am wrecked, I gotta go home. And so it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of being human. So please, I can just say it works for me. So I encourage you to see if it works for you. In Australia, 1 in 5 people experience mental illness, and yet many of people don't seek help because of what they perceive as being the stigma. And so it is important to seek help when you need it, and to know that there is support available, and there always will be people who listen. We all experience mental health challenges, whether it's anxiety, depression, eating disorders, suicide ideation, or self-harm, and everyone has a right to find help and support. Now, we're going to hear from our panel shortly, who will address the challenges, talk about resilience and growth that people have experienced during COVID-19. And I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, who is joining us virtually from Brisbane, Therese Rain, who will deliver a short address before we begin our panel discussion. And thank you for being with us today, Therese, and hopefully you were there somewhere. There you are, excellent. And Therese, come on, Canberra's open to Brisbane. We could have had you down here, but I kind of understand that once you quit flying, there's a certain loveliness of not flying. Therese, of course, is an ANU alumna. She graduated with a Master's of Psychology in 1981, is an Australian entrepreneur. She has worked as a rehabilitation counselor and founded the company Ingeus, which helps more than 150,000 people every year to find reemployment. Therese was committed to drive reform in disability, mental health, and childhood learning during the time when her husband, Kevin Rudd, also an alum, was in office as a prime minister and was awarded the 2010 Human Rights Medal for her long-term dedication to human rights, especially the rights of people with disability. Therese was awarded the 2014 ANU Alumni of the Year Award, and we are very pleased to welcome, Therese, you back to campus, albeit virtually. Now, before I hand over to Therese, I'd also like to welcome back our moderator today, Brad Arthur. Brad is also an alumnus of ANU, having completed a Bachelor of Psychology with honors and a PhD in population mental health. Brad currently works as an advisor in the Department of Prime Minister Thank you for being here, Brad. And I also thank our Andrew, Lou, Ian, and Tracy. Please join me in welcoming Therese Ring.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Brian. I'm just getting a little bit of feedback. I'd like to acknowledge also the countries on which we convene and the airways, their traditional custodians, their elders past and present and emerging, and acknowledge that this is, was, and always will be Aboriginal land. Do you feel as though you sometimes have whiplash? I just don't know at the moment which way to turn sometimes. So much that I thought was certain is actually uncertain. The things I thought I could count on and anticipate and plan for, I can't. I had very different plans for this year, 2020, I can tell you that. And I know that a lot of other people did too. And there's this saying now, which is how very 2020 of it, as something yet again changes, comes at us out of the blue, and we have to cope with it. I didn't plan, of course, for a global pandemic. I didn't plan for the possibility even of a non-peaceful transition of power if the current President of the United States is not re-elected by the people. I had kind of planned for continuing climate change, but not for it to be so submerged as part of the agenda. I had anticipated that at some point there would be significant stepwise change to digital delivery of health, shopping, learning. And of course, we anticipated that, and that's hence the idea of the National Broadband Network delivering fibre to the premises. But this is stepwise change that's affecting the way we relate to each other as well. I hadn't planned to be physically separated from family and friends for months and months and months. I had not planned to not be able to get my arms around my grandchildren for months. I had not anticipated that America put its foot on the accelerator to relative decline in power and economy compared to China with quite the speed of change that they have, nor the speed of change or the temperature of our relationship as a country with our largest trading partner, China. And I think that the university sector had not anticipated the perfect storm of factors which would radically reduce the number of international students and the amount of funding for research, or the delivery of education digitally, or research collaboration moving to digital, or just the huge strain on the finances of these institutions. And I take my hat off to the leadership of all of Australia's universities as they have grappled with this proactively, keeping their eye on purpose. So I sometimes feel like I have whiplash. I don't know which way to turn. I wake up in the middle of the night and think, what has he done now? And you know who I'm talking about. About 3 o'clock in the morning, is he tweeting? And, you know, where has everything shifted? It feels to me like a lot is hard to anticipate, hard to plan. So what do we do with the plans that we've made, the vision of the future that we've had for ourselves when that is all disrupted? Well, the truth is that we're human and we're therefore fundamentally creative, and in the university environment, intelligent, curious, inventive, able to deal with complexity. So we create different ways of being, different things to focus on, different versions of the future, different ways of relating to friends and family and colleagues. We adapt. We've already adapted, and there will be more to do. In my growing up, my dad was a gold medal winning Paralympian in archery. He became a paraplegic in his very early 20s. which meant he couldn't walk, and he had no feeling from kind of underneath the armpits down. And this was as a result of a plane crash during the Second World War. He told me that we should focus on optimizing the things that do work and not focus on the things that don't. In a way, that's another version of that wonderful serenity prayer about having the courage to change the things we can, the serenity to accept the things we can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. But how do we build our life satisfaction and therefore mental health, our happiness, if you like, during times of enormous change and challenge? Well, I think we can turn to some theories. I studied Martin Seligman's work on learned helplessness for my thesis when I was at ANU in 1981. So it's natural, of course, that I would turn to his work, which you can find in the book Flourish. I'm not going to get highly theoretical about this, but these are things that you can do, behaviours you can change, both cognitive and physical, which can build well-being, life satisfaction, happiness, and positive mental health. So Seligman says there are a number of things you can do which can build life satisfaction, which he's summarised into PERMA-P. So to personalise that, I might just kind of tell you some of the things I've been doing. And if you reflect back on what Brian has just said about how he is pacing and caring for himself during times of enormous challenge and stress, you'll see some of that reflected here. So Seligman says that we should build a practice around focusing on things that create positive emotion. So for me, that means savouring beauty and joy. It might be as simple as sand between the toes, the sound of the waves, the Banksias in the national park contemplating a painting, Mendelssohn's violin concerto, Ella and Louis singing "You Can't Take That Away From Me," the purring warmth of a kitten, the joy of cooking something new, the practice of gratitude. Silence, I have found actually very beautiful, taking time rather than spending it. And I guess the question is, what gives you joy? What do you find beautiful? What takes you out of yourself and above and beyond? And do more of that. Secondly, Seligman says that being engaged builds life satisfaction. So what do you do where time just vanishes? Is it when you're learning something new? I know that makes time just disappear. When I'm involved in things that are in my field of fascination, creatively solving a problem, stretching myself and being challenged. I've been learning about Australian sculptors, and I've been taking myself out of my comfort zone with cooking. These are just little things, but they have helped me feel happier and calmer. I've been reviving my very small skills playing the piano, and I've been learning about shells on our beach and the flora and fauna in our national park. So what's your field of fascination? What stretches you? What challenges you? Do more of that. Seligman says that being in positive relationships builds our life satisfaction. And of course, that has been really challenging in some ways this year. What I've noticed is with the shift to digital, I am now part of a number of quite large WhatsApp groups around the world. So every morning when I wake up, there's this whole stream of humour and memes and things that people have read and thoughts about epigenetics. And it's fascinating every morning. It's lovely to wake to. It's lovely to contribute to and connect with. Because I was traveling a lot before, I was doing a lot of digital relating to my grandchildren, reading them stories, playing hide and seek, cooking with them on FaceTime. But somehow the changes this year have meant more active, constructive listening from me, and that has actually been really positive. I guess the question is, in terms of building positive relationships, who are the people who, when you leave them, you feel better about yourself and about the world? And can you work on being that person in other people's lives? Seligman also says that 50% of life satisfaction comes from a sense of purpose and meaning, and using one's signature strengths in the service of something bigger than one is, that one believes in. This, in times of rapid change, when we have senses of futures that might have involved continuing with a research project or starting something or joining a business that perhaps is now not hiring, in order to fulfill a sense of purpose and take the next step. That can be really challenging. This has been the hardest thing for me to work on, and I found it really helpful to work through some of that with a professional. Some of the questions that I've been asking myself then are, what now is bigger than I am that I want to see different in the world? Is there an organisation that is doing work that really inspires me, and how can I help them? Is there something that I can see in the world that's new that makes me angry that I want to see changed? Is there something I want to create? How might I do that? When you're in university, you're exploring and working towards something bigger. It might be researching rare eucalypts. It might be the deployment of the cheapest solar power to save the planet. And hopefully it's, at least for some people, it's working on a safe, non-cold chain dependent, cheap vaccine for COVID-19. Whatever it is, I hope you find your life's work in it. Seligman says that part of life satisfaction comes from a sense of accomplishment and achievement. It might be as simple as making a bed. It might come from exercising mastery, completing a project, producing a beautiful meal, planting a garden, solving a complex problem, working as part of a team, and many other things. They don't have to be big things. And then Seligman says that part of life satisfaction is actually physical. And Brian alluded to that. Sleep, hydration, nourishment, movement, stretching. There's a lot at the moment that's out of our control, small, medium and big. But there are things that are in our control. And positively connecting with others, staying focused on purpose and continuing to challenge ourselves so that we can create a future for ourselves and for the world that we are barely imagining now. I think that's our challenge, and I think it's really possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Therese. I think you've set the scene really well there with capturing real uncertainty that comes with 2020 and asking that really poignant question about how we adapt. And thank you for also offering all those insights about how to flourish with Seligman's theoretical angle and then giving it that personal touch. Hey everyone, I'm Brad, as Brian mentioned. I'm your moderator for today. I am going to introduce for you in a moment all these lovely panelists and tell you a bit about the format. I'm very excited to be a part of this discussion today. I think it's a really important time to be talking about mental health, and one of the best times that I've seen so far to be talking about it. I think the public discourse has been growing in a level of quality that makes now a really great time to be asking how do we adapt. Okay, so on the far right here, we have Andrew Staniforth, who is the head of the ANU Counselling. He's a clinical psychologist, and he has extensive experience in providing psychotherapeutic interventions to clients in public mental health, private practice, and tertiary counselling sector. To my right, immediate right, we have Dr. Lou Farah, who is a senior research fellow and psychologist at the Centre for Mental Health Research here at the ANU. And she holds an ARC Discovery Early Career Researcher Award to examine how digital mental health programs and other technologies are used in clinical practice. To my immediate left is Professor Ian Anderson. Ian is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Student and University Experience at ANU. He took up the role in March 2020. Ian is a Palawa man from the northwest coast of Tasmania with traditional ties to country known as Tebrakana. He was the Deputy Secretary of Indigenous Affairs in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet in 2017 and the Deputy Chief Executive of the National Indigenous Australians Agency. He spent most of his professional life working in Indigenous health and education. He graduated as a doctor in 1989 and was awarded a PhD in 2006. On my far left is Professor Tracy Smart. Tracy is a professor, physician, health leader, and a retired Royal Australian Air Force senior officer. During 35 years of service, she served in tactical and operational and strategic roles in the RAF and the broader Australian Defence Force. She participated in overseas deployments and served as Surgeon General of the Australian Defence Force from 2015 to 2019. In May, she commenced as Professor of Military and Aerospace Medicine at ANU, and in August took on an additional role of the Public Health Lead for COVID-19 Response Office. I, in a moment, have a question for each of these panelists that might give you a bit of time for the audience to start thinking about what questions you have also. I have visibility of the comments feed on the YouTube channel. So if anyone online wishes to ask a question, you can also feed that through by popping a question in there. Just as some extra housekeeping notes, available on site today, we have Laura from the Counselling Centre, who, if anyone here wishes to speak to in a bit of a safe space, you can have a chat with Laura. Online, ANU Counselling Centre offers quite a few services. There's some phone numbers for both a hotline that you can call, as well as a text messaging service for all of us that don't necessarily feel comfortable having an immediate phone call. You'll find the phone numbers for that in the communications that went out for this event. All right, let's kick off. Just a short 1 or 2 minute response from each of the panelists to some of my questions, and then we'll get into the discussion. So Andrew, I was hoping to start with you as somebody who has a lot of first-hand experience with people who've been addressing mental health issues in the climate of 2020. And I was wondering if you can tell us a bit more about the impacts you're seeing of the events of the last 12 months on people.
Thanks, Brad. What we know this year is that we're facing unprecedented change, and it is anxiety provoking, and for some people it will feel traumatic, where we have a loss of sense of predictability about our future, sense of certainty. The world has changed in ways we couldn't have imagined 12 months ago, and we've had fires and hail and now a pandemic. And what we see at ANU Counselling, and the students talking to us and the staff experience too, is this level of uncertainty means we're all more on edge and hyper-vigilant. So the slide that I've got up really talks about this. It's an autonomic nervous system model, and when we're doing our best, we're calm, we're regulated. So some of the things that Therese was talking about just then really are about that green level on the slide, the social engagement. And the more that we can do that, the more we're regulating ourselves, the more we're taking care of ourselves and able to function and flourish in the ways that we hoped. If we move up that into the red, that's where we are in the fight-flight, which is the sympathetic nervous system doing what it's meant to do, preparing us to run or to address something that we need to address. If we're experiencing high levels of ongoing anxiety or an experience such as this year, it could be that we're on edge much more of the time, and we know that the students that we're seeing would be talking about this. And that's separate from if they already have, or if all of us already have our own traumatic experiences that we might have brought into the last 12 months. It means we're going to be functioning at a on edge, higher level, and maybe not be as relaxed as we would like. This has an ongoing impact on how we have our sense of safety in the world, how we're maybe able to make decisions and think about the future. And if we go further up into that blue, this is where we might freeze. So we're so overwhelmed that we don't really know what to do, and we just stop functioning. And ideally what we want to do is move the other way. So in the literature, it talks about post-traumatic growth, and how we can regulate our autonomic nervous system is really doing things where we have a sense of control. So we don't know what's going to happen with the pandemic or what will happen this summer, but there's things, as Therese mentioned, that we might be able to do. So even as I sit here and anticipating a question, I was working on looking at the vista that I have of Black Mountain Tower and just being calm so that I'm able, hopefully, to articulate what I want. I'll leave it there, Brad. Thanks.
Cool, thanks. Ian, I was hoping to go to you next, if we might complement that with the broader perspective at, say, a population level of how you see the events of the last year impacting on a social and cultural level.
Okay, I want you to hold that thought about how your body responds to threats that Andrew left you. I'll come back to that. So kind of the challenge from a public health point of view is how do we think about the world and systems that we might want to create that are preventative or restorative in these times of threat. One of the things that we often talk about in public health, and this aligns very strongly with Therese's use of Seligman, is about social connectedness. We know that social connectedness is protective particularly around mental health issues, and that's really particularly important at the moment because social connectedness is driving the pandemic. It's also driving our response. So we are disconnecting people, as this room is a perfect metaphor for. I want to talk about social connectedness in three ways. It's important to understand how it is protective of mental health. I want to start with LinkedIn. LinkedIn is an app that provides us with links to people who might be resources to us. It's a business app, right? So there's an element of social connectedness that connects us as human beings to resources out there that we need in order to thrive and do more than survive. And you might recall that in the early days of the pandemic, when we're all in a state of panic, I'm talking about March, about the time I came to this university, what was I doing? I was on Facebook. I was on Facebook all the time, looking for answers, looking for resources. And thankfully that has now receded. I'm not quite as obsessed to what the commentary in my Facebook community is. But that's only one element of the ways in which social connectedness protects us. There's another element of social connectedness which is emotional. When we're together, we laugh. When we are together, we have emotional responses to the people that we're around. And there are elements of that which are not healthy, and there are elements which can be healthy. And our challenge from a public health point of view is how do we amplify those kind of more healthy emotional responses to the people that we're around. Then finally, I want to say that there's something more deep-rooted around social connectedness, because our connections with people is deeply biological. Andrew talked about the ways in which the nervous system responds. There's also another kind of biological response, which is a much more long form, and that's through hormonal systems. So I'm going to illustrate this. Who in the room has a dog? Okay. Have you ever been in a moment, and you can apply this to cats, but I don't understand cats and I don't understand cat people, where you've kind of been in that moment with your dog, kind of looking in their eyes and you say, I love you, right? And you realise, step back, that's weird. What's happening? It's serotonin. Serotonin is a bonding kind of emotional response. And serotonin gets imprinted over time through deep personal relationships. So there's a way in which our social connectedness actually is built into, gets under the skin, and that generates effective responses. It also generates protective responses, particularly around mental health. And this is well documented in the international literature, but also possibly in terms of some of the chronic diseases. So our challenge for an institution in the moment of COVID is how do we find other ways to continue to build social relationships. They can be online, but we need to refigure how we also connect people. How do we build those kind of interactive moments which are embodied? Now, the final thing I want to say is how that happens for us is all culturally bound. So we know that for young Aboriginal people, that one of the drivers of suicide is social isolation. The ways in which we come together has cultural meaning, and we need to understand the different ways that have different meanings for us in order to generate our responses, in order to kind of find solutions that are meaningful for Indigenous Australians, non-Indigenous Australians, and all kind of differently cultural groups that are part of our rich diversity. One final thing, this is about mental health, but actually some of these strategies are really critical for all sorts of things. This is really important for the ANU community, beyond well-being. How do we form relationships? How do we make them meaningful? How do we make them nurturing? And so on. So this is a bigger question for us. It's a particularly relevant and germane question to mental health and mental health prevention, but it's also a bigger issue around our broader forward thinking about the kind of ANU community that we want to build.
Thanks, Ian. I just wanted to flag as well, I've just realised that we've got the screens currently with the logo, but Trace is still with us. I have a direct line to her in the chat as well, and we'll certainly be bringing her back into the conversation when we start up the discussion. But continuing on, Tracy, I was hoping to bring us to a kind of an individual level now. I was reading in your bio that you have lived experience from your time in the Defence Forces, and I was wondering if you'd be happy to share a bit of that with us.
Sure, be happy to. In the Defence Forces, we haven't mentioned yet the R word, resilience. It's a word that's thrown around a lot, and a lot of people, particularly in the pandemic, have been talking about resilience and how do we get through this. And a lot of people sort of misinterpret that and almost imply that if you have a mental health problem, it means you're not resilient, which is totally wrong. We almost pay lip service to it. Being resilient, of course, by definition, means bouncing back. And all the things we've been talking about today, about flourishing, about thriving, about well-being, all of these are incredibly important to set you up for resilience. So all of those things, I look at it as keeping your well-being battery charged, ready for what life throws at you, because life does throw curveballs, as we've seen this year. But resilience also means understanding where that battery is getting low, or understanding when you are not able to look after your own well-being, and then reaching out for help. And there's so much stigma about that still, despite the increased mental health literacy, all these things, there's so much stigma about asking for help. And I wanted to give you an example of a time when my wellbeing battery was at its lowest. Now, I've had a few traumatic experiences in the Defence Force. I was on a peacekeeping mission in Rwanda in the mid-90s, and that was pretty tough. But the most traumatic experience was when I went to an F-111 aircraft accident off an island off the coast of Malaysia in 1999. And both of the guys who died in that accident I knew, and I knew their wives as well. And my job was not only to do the accident investigation, but also to retrieve those bodies in a swamp, in really high humidity and high heat conditions. So the first night after being out there on the island all day, back on the ship we were operating from, I had an incredibly vivid and traumatic nightmare about being in Rwanda. And the next morning I woke up quite distressed, and I was physically ill in the heads, as they call them on Navy ships, in the toilets. And every fibre of my being said, do not go out again. It's dangerous for you. But I had to. There was no one else. We had to get the job done. So I had to push through. But what I did was, when we got back to Australia, the first thing I did was arrange follow-ups for all of my team that were out there with me. But then I went myself to the on-base psychologist and told my story and how it made me feel and what the effects had been. I actually call that letting the pus out, telling your story. It's incredibly important to let the pus out. That's the doctor's view of the world. But I was able to talk through with a psychologist who was able to give me some help, some techniques that I took back and I applied. And then by the time I went back to see them, we both agreed that I was travelling okay and that I was okay to continue work. And doing that, realising that I had a problem and getting that help actually made me not only more resilient, but I actually think that I got post-traumatic growth. I got it. I don't know if it's a disease, but I experienced post-traumatic growth. I got stronger by going through that trauma, realising that I needed help, learning some techniques, and I was able then, the next traumatic event that happened, because they always do, I was able to actually apply those techniques and bounce back even stronger after that as well. So that's my lesson to everybody. There is a time when we will all feel bad and feel that we've reached the end of our tether. That is the time. Before that, actually, recognising when that's coming is important, and getting that help when you need it is important. The help is here. ANU has got incredible resources. Everybody please use them.
Thank you, Tracy. Lou, as an expert in digital mental health technologies, I think this year is probably one of the hottest for talk of how those can be used best, especially when a lot of us have been quite isolated at times. So I was just wondering if you could give us some insights on how those could be used, how to look after your mental health when you can't see people face to face.
Lovely, thanks, Brad. Something that I'm really, really passionate about, and it's really been what's driven my research career really for the last 15 years, is finding ways to use the good in technology, to find ways that we can harness technology and utilise technology to be able to help our mental health. And this has really come from a place really back in the early 2000s. The pioneering work in this, particularly in Australia, actually happened here at the ANU. It happened at the Centre for Mental Health Research, where some of the first digital mental health programs were developed. And this came out of an idea of thinking that, well, like Brian said, we know that 2/3 of people with a mental health problem don't ever seek help. And we know, again, as Tracy spoke about as well, the reasons for this obviously are around stigma. But we also know that it might be hard for people to get access to mental health care because there might be long wait lists to see a psychologist. People may not be able to afford it, or they may live in areas where they don't actually have access to mental health professionals. And so we've been looking at ways that we can actually get mental health help directly out to people where they are. So rather than relying on people to themselves make the leap and find it for themselves, we're actually trying to find ways to get it out to people. And so I suppose what really drives me is that I think nothing can replace a human interaction. Nothing can replace what it's like to be with somebody face to face and have that felt sense of being with somebody and have them understand what you're going through. But we can do a pretty good job of approximating that, and we can use technology to do that. And COVID this year has been an incredible example of how we can do that. Some of the research that I've been looking at this year has been in the rise of telehealth, so being able to connect with a psychologist either over the phone or through video conferencing. And this is something that people can do really, really effectively. There's some evidence to show that people have been delaying seeking help this year because they've been hoping for a time where things might go back to normal, where this pandemic period might finish, lockdown will ease, and we'll be able to go back to seeing people face to face. And in some areas that's somewhat true, but what I really encourage people to do is this may become part of our new normal. So connecting with people over distance is something not to be afraid of. It's something that can be done really, really effectively. And I think what this year has shown is it's kind of given us a nudge in the direction of it being a little bit more mainstream, perhaps, than what it previously has been. So there are lots of different ways that you can utilise technology. You can connect with people directly with a person, either over the phone or through video conferencing, and I'd really encourage anybody to do that if you've been concerned about your mental health or worried. But also, for a lot of people, seeking help for mental health problems is a really scary and confronting thing to do. And so there are lots of other ways that you can use technology to help your mental health, where you don't actually have to involve a human being necessarily at all. And this is a funny thing for me to say because I'm a psychologist. I value the input that humans can have and how humans can help each other in the mental health space. There's a lot of evidence-based programs out there where you can actually get the kind of therapy that you would get with a psychologist, either face-to-face or over the phone, but you can do it in a self-help way as well. So there are lots of ways that you can actually access programs without anybody knowing, so completely privately, in the middle of the night, on weekends, if there are times that you can't actually access somebody. So there are lots of programs, and a lot of really good programs have actually been developed in Australia as well. As we've sort of heard from the rest of our panellists as well, there are ways that you can text, there are ways that you can telephone, there are many, many services out there. So I suppose what underlies this for me is about accessibility. We know that not the same thing works for everybody. And so if we can provide a huge suite or a big range of ways that people can access mental health help, hopefully we'll be able to increase the numbers of people who feel comfortable to seek help. Yeah. Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Lou. Awesome. Okay, everyone. That brings us to the Q&A section of our panel discussion today. So if anyone who's online, feel free now to start throwing in some questions. Or firstly, to our panelists, if they've had any reflections on what each other have said that they wish to offer now, feel free to go for that as well.
Jump in. On what Tracy said about resiliency, I guess I was thinking about it's really the meaning that we make out of our experiences, and sometimes we can make meaning out of it on our own, and sometimes we might have someone helping facilitate that journey for ourselves. Like Lou was talking about, doesn't have to be in person, can be via video, can be in journaling, but really the way we kind of hopefully can come through this experience and get to the other side is through what meaning we're making of it now and looking at how we can take some control over where we're going.
Thanks, Andrew. Someone online is asking about if we'll be able to watch this later. Make a note of that for the tech crew, and I'm sure we can resolve that one. Currently, no other questions come. Oh, yeah.
I'll try to get things started. So one of the interesting things of running a university like this right now is, of course, I've never been trained in mental health, and there are certain, I guess, views out there about how leaders are supposed to help people through crises. And so I'd kind of like to get some reflections, because in the end, everyone's a leader and everyone's a follower, depending on exactly what they're doing. So everyone here will have leadership roles. But how does one? I mean, what are the types of things that people should do to help others when we are in these stressful times? We've just seen Donald Trump's medical team decide to lie outright about his condition to calm people. Now, I will say that's not my instinctive way to deal with things. I'm unfortunately the person who goes through and is just absolutely about telling everyone everything. And that would be considered to be poor leadership in most things that are talked about worldwide, because it causes panic. And I'm just curious to get reflections about how we help others as leaders, because as I said, each of us have those leadership roles.
Ian, as a leader in ANU of Wellbeing, do you want to offer some comments?
The use of the mic is quite important for me as an inveterate mumbler. But I think there are a number of things that are really critical for us to think about. The first is that we are often required to give meaning to events. Now, as a university, I hope that we are committed to an evidence-based approach to that, drawing on knowledge, drawing on scientific resources, but we need to explain to those people that we lead what is it that it's happening. The second thing is that we need to think about how do we marshal our resources in a different way, and that particularly comes back to how do we keep connected? How do we keep connecting as we move through this crisis? And then there's something else that someone else raised just then. What do we see the long-term view here? So I'm one of the view that this is going to be part of the new normal, that we will get through this crisis and that we will figure out ways to reconnect, but the fundamental drivers of this pandemic are still there. And they are global ecological change, human-animal interactions, and human travel. Yeah, and we've seen that over the last 20 to 30 years, a number of epidemics. So we're not out of the woods. Our kids are not out of the woods on this one. So we do need to think about how we chart that long vision. So it's the meaning, the emotional response, the resources, in the crisis, but also where are we going?
Thanks. Yeah, I've got a few people wanting to comment. Teresa, I take it that that resonates with you as well. Do you want to provide some comments?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right about providing a sense of meaning. So what is actually happening here? The description of the reality without flinching, I think, is very helpful. Then what is our purpose? I think leaders talk about why are we here and what are we here to do? So really that sense of what is, in your case, what is a university, or, you know, who is this country and what are we here to do, and what are our strengths? What are our core continuing characteristics that we can draw on at this time? What can we build on? What tool, as you've commented, is marshalling the resources, particularly marshalling the strengths. What tools do we have that we have perhaps underutilized before, and how can we use those differently? And then, you know, 5 years down the track, where are we? What are we doing? What do we look like? Who's participating? How are we with each other? What's our culture around here? What are the ways we're going to do things? And then you get to listen a lot from other people about their perception on all of those things and create a shared sense of the future. And that seems to me then to free people's energy to co-create that future together.
Just bouncing off a question that's been posed online. What we're talking about here is leaders have a clear role in painting a vision and co-creating a vision of the way forward. The experience of people in Melbourne, particularly at the moment, is that we're going to be back to normal sometime soon, but then that horizon just keeps on getting pushed out and out and out. And so how do we co-create that vision when that occurs? How do leaders communicate sort of realistically, but simultaneously offering hope, but realistic to the idea that it could keep on changing?
That's so 2020. I had the mic off, on mute, sorry. You know, that is the big challenge, and I think there have been quite a few false dawns that have been put out there in the interests of being positive with this disease and this pandemic. And I think the important thing, one of the strongest things you can do in a leader is obviously being authentic and say, look, we don't really know. We don't really know what's happening. We have to work through this together. We have to, you know, but what we do know is this. What we do know is that there'll be no miracle cure for COVID anytime soon, and therefore we have to start changing the way we live. We have to find our new normal, and our new normal won't look like the old normal, but it actually could look as good, if not better, if we do things right by following some really basic principles as opposed to rules. So I think it is a challenge. But I think, you know, I think we're seeing now the messaging is changing to that longer term view rather than we'll have a vaccine by election day in the US and all of these sort of things. We're starting to see the messaging go to much more strategic. That I think going back to your question, Brian, being truthful, being honest, being honest about when you do know, but when you don't know things is just really important in this situation and all.
I'm directing this one openly again, particularly to some of the leaders, hoping to connect personally with people in this. How scary is authenticity? So for example, being authentic about and genuine about what you feel, perhaps even from, say, a political sense, being open about what you don't know, showing weakness and saying, I don't know when that horizon's going to be. I can't offer you that certainty.
You mean scary for yourself or scary for others?
Scary for yourself.
Could be scary for others too sometimes, you never know. You know, but look, it's, I'm a person who came from a small country town, so I don't know anything but being the girl from Kangarilla and been able to hold on to that as I've gone through. And I think, I think people can sniff out when you're not being authentic. So I think, this comes into this, I guess, this whole business of well-being and flourishing is to deeply understand yourself and let you be you, as they say. It can be scary for some, but it really can, if you don't embrace that, I think it really makes it difficult to be a good leader and to reach that stage of flourishing.
Thanks, Ian. It looks like you're keen to jump in there. I just want to flag two things. Keen to, Mark online has coined the new phrase. He thinks we should be talking about the new abnormal. And in a moment, I think we'll come across to this side of the panel as well with a few other questions. But yeah, Ian, if you want to go.
So it's actually more difficult to be guarded emotionally. So I've been a senior public servant. I've led negotiations with stakeholders I've known all my grown life, and I've had to negotiate a government position. It's not a moment of great authenticity where I'm not talking about my view, I'm representing the government, and that's really challenging emotionally. It's challenging as leaders when we're leading difficult change processes, because our intuition mostly is to say how we feel, to share how we feel, but we can't always, we have to guard our authenticity in some of those moments. So I think that those moments are morally, ethically and emotionally challenging. And it requires of us some very good navigations, particularly ethical ones, about how we navigate those really difficult times and difficult circumstances.
Thanks. We're getting some questions coming in about people interested in finding out about how to connect with others, like really connect in the sense that Ian was talking about before, when everything's online, and to hear about some of the positive mental health outcomes of the pandemic so far. So I was wondering, perhaps if Lou and Andrew, you might be able to reflect on when you've seen people using technology well to the benefit of their own mental health and others, and when not so well. And so what are some of the defining characteristics that can send things one way or the other?
I think technology is a force that's good and evil. Well, I think everyone has a pretty good understanding of that. I actually recently did a comment on this phenomenon that's happening at the moment called doom scrolling, where people seem to be sort of addicted to their social media or the news feed and be thinking about wanting to just get more and more information to kind of confirm their already existing panicked beliefs or beliefs about worries about what's happening in the future. And so yeah, it's a really difficult tension between staying connected and being able to have an online presence so that you can connect with people. And we know that it can be done effectively with genuine and true warmth. I think we know just in our personal lives that we can connect with our loved ones and with other people through distance and know that it's genuine and real, while at the same time also placing limits on our technology use so that it doesn't adversely affect our mood. And we're all very vulnerable to this, particularly at a time now where there's a 24-hour news cycle and we have such ready access, I suppose, to any kind of information, unfiltered information as well. And the only thing I can really say is actually around being able to check in with yourself and to understand the impacts that your use is having on your own mood. Some of the challenges, I suppose, is that we often do this quite unconsciously. You know, how often do you find that you're just scrolling your phone and 20 minutes has passed and you think, oh, you know, how did that even happen? So it's really about being cognizant and being really aware, I suppose, of these sorts of things and how you're using it intentionally or purposely. What purpose is it serving you? And look, if you're finding that it's actually unhelpful and it is impacting your mood, it's got to be actually you've got to put the phone on the other side of the room. You've got to set a timer. You've got to do those really rudimentary type things to actually break yourself of that habit if you're finding that it's having some sort of addictive qualities as well. But not an easy thing to answer, and it's not an easy thing to do. I really acknowledge that the tension between staying connected and also staying disconnected when you need to is a really tough one for many, many people. Do you have anything?
Yeah, look, I think it fits with a phenomenon that we're aware of in psychology as well, which, and generally how we're living. We do things well in moderation. When we're doing anything to an extreme level, it becomes unhelpful. And we've all probably experienced being zoomed out with whatever we're doing through the day. And you might want to connect with a friend in the evening, but also staring at a phone or a computer screen is the last thing you want to do. And I think it's being able to recognize how much of something do I need at the moment and checking in with yourself, so that I might have a desire to connect with a friend, and if they're not here, I can't do it in person, but is right now the right time? How can I set it up so I'm going to be in a good place to do that? Just like maybe I like eating pizza, but if I do it all the time, it's not going to be healthy. But meeting someone to have pizza once a fortnight, that could be really good.
Therese, you mentioned earlier that your phone's been blowing up this year in terms of chat groups and things. Have you found that those chat groups have mainly been an upside in terms of connectedness, or have you found some challenges as well with the way you use technology?
Yeah, so I'm getting feedback still. There are two particular chat groups that are really, really healthy. Because there's a combination of here's a fabulous piece of music I've just listened to, here's something that's made me laugh, here's a book I'm reading, and then discussion about ideas. And it's with a group of people who are in Canada, the US, Australia and the UK and France. So people have got different perspectives, and that's really rich. It's really, and it's fast and it's funny. It's like being at a great dinner party. So once I've sort of caught up in the morning, I can participate with a cup of coffee and I feel like I'm chatting with friends. I am chatting with friends. You don't have to talk all the time, but there's this whole flow of conversation happening, which feels like immersive. It feels immersive. There's another chat group which is less fulfilling, where they kind of Pollyanna each other all the time, and everything's wonderful and everything's fine, and it's not authentic. It's actually not authentic. So I kind of don't visit that group nearly as often. And then I have other friends that I'm interacting with on the phone. I'm talking to my mum on the phone. She's 94. But I'm FaceTiming our son in Singapore and his wife and their two cats, and whatever. There's a lot of communication happening. A number of people said to me they were very lonely during lockdown. That's not how I felt at all. If anything, I needed to go, okay, I'm going to do this exactly as you've just said. I'm going to do this much of this, and then I'm going to go for a walk on the beach without my phone, and get some sand between the toes. I'm very lucky about where I live, and get some fresh air and look at the waves and the whales and the osprey swooping, all of that. So I think it's important. The balance was really important, and silence was also really important, to just sit and listen to the birds and, watch the clouds scud through the sky. That was important to have all of that happening. With our grandchildren, I had less contact with them than I would have liked. Particularly during lockdown, I really miss the hugs and the snuggling up to read a book, and those little hands in mine. And they got zoomed out very quickly. They didn't have a lot of tolerance for it, when normally we would read a book over Skype or FaceTime and play hide and seek or do whatever, have jokes and do things. So I felt like it was harder to stay in contact with them, particularly for Josie. She was doing homeschooling, and she had enough screen time, really. So it was more phone calls to them. It changed. So choosing the channel that works for everybody, it's going to be different channels, different strokes for different folks, I guess.
I found it quite interesting when you described the chat groups a bit like a dinner party. It reminds me of some of the early days in the pandemic where it kind of had such a novelty feel to it and like all sorts of excitement and that kind of thing. And I feel like we adapted quite well initially and were excited by a lot of the things that we were doing. And as one of people online have commented, like, substance use was quite a feature of that. Myself, and I know a few other people, opened a lot more wines when they were working from home. And that was possibly under the expectation of that maybe this wasn't going to go on for as long as we thought. That we have certain coping strategies that might help for a short-term period, opening a bottle of wine, and some that are not great necessarily as long-term strategies. I get the sense that we've all had an opportunity in this to try and distill and work out what are the coping strategies that work for us over the longer term, not just the shorter term. And maybe if there's anyone else who wants to offer reflections about their experience distilling what works for them in terms of coping strategies, open to it.
Only boring. So one of the things, and look, I do appreciate nice wine, but it's a very short-term tool, really. Tips very quickly into harmful, self-destructive behaviour. One of the things I did in the pandemic is I hooked up again with my personal trainer and boot camp provider, who was suddenly in Canberra all the time, who was doing one-on-ones, and I've had exercise 3 days a week. We'll do it here on campus. He comes and joins me. It's over my lunchtime. I mostly get everyone else on campus to structure their meetings around that. Not always. But that discipline has really worked for me. And it has worked for me in all sorts of good ways because, I'm also chronic disease, diabetic. I've lost 10 kilos. Not just in 6 months, it's been a bit longer than that. So I think that it's your commitment to healthy regimens. It might be walking on the beach, right? These are the things that go first in a moment of crisis, but actually in a moment of crisis, they're the things you've got to hang on to. And you've got to make that choice about, A, what works for you, but actually I'm going to develop a regimen of practice. I'm going to hang on to this. I don't care if my boss, then and now, needs something at a particular point in time. I'm going to prioritise me. And that's hard because we're not all in a job that gives us the resources to do that. I'm very fortunate I am, but it is a personal commitment. You've got to pick the regimes that are really important to you and really stick to it.
On what Ian said there, this has been something that we've been talking with students and staff about for many years beyond just the last year with all the changes, which is if we're trying to set up a good studies schedule, it's about trying to make sure you've still got all the other things in your life going well, and that when it's crunch time, you're not sacrificing the walk on the beach, as Teresa said, or time in nature, or catching up with a friend, because it's those things that are going to really help us be able to then get through the other things too. And we know that having time in nature, for example, being able to play, connect with kids, as I'm fortunate to be able to do. Hello. I had to say hello. And being able to really find the ways that we identify as helpful. I'm listening to a lot more music, and I haven't done that for a long time. I'm reading books, proper books, because I don't want to talk with lots of people all the time, and I know that sets me up for the next day so that I can come in and do what I need to do, whatever is unexpected and unfolding.
I think the other important thing is, it's been mentioned already a little bit, having some things you can switch off, ways to switch off. A lot of people talk about mindfulness and things like that. I can't lay still and think of nothing, I'm afraid. but one of my best mindfulness activities is embarrassingly doing Lego. Part of my job is space medicine, and I'm doing sort of some of the Apollo stuff at the moment, Saturn V rocket. It's a beauty. But just doing that, rather than lose mindlessness, which is probably the doom scrolling, spending hours just putting the Legos together is just the best switch off mindfulness. Plus, it gives you the joy and the sense of purpose and a great outcome at the end. Sitting in my office, if anybody wants to see it.
That's a perfect mindfulness activity, actually, because it grounds you in the present moment. It's perfect.
It's not just clearing your mind and breathing. Anything we attend to attentively with can have this impact. Stretching, yoga, they're great.
Another quite practically oriented question. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I've with my eyes going between panelists, 2 screens and stuff, I've missed some of the questions from the audience, but I'll come back to you in a moment. Another practical question coming through from online is, does anyone have any tips to offer about reaching out and making those sort of initial connections with people if you're feeling isolated? Maybe to Andrew, if... Yeah.
Look, I'll talk about that practically. If you're a student or staff member, hopefully you've been sent out information when you registered. But there's also the ANU Wellbeing and Support line that you can text or phone, and that could be a way to just reach out and explore how to connect and get more help. And I'd encourage you to do that. If you're not a staff member or a student here, there's lots of places that you can go and find ways to get help. And Beyond Blue, Lifeline, Kids Helpline, they're really great, and they've got lots of information and resources on their websites.
Awesome, thanks. To the audience, yeah, thank you.
Hello, everybody. I don't even know if it's a question, more of a statement, and particularly because Ian mentioned it in relation to the protective factors around social connectedness and the cultural impact. And so my role at the ANU is I manage student incidents and support, and what is really apparent at the moment is the lack of connectedness and the isolation that international students at the moment are feeling. And, we're working as much as we can on an individual level with them, because obviously they've all got a different scenario. But in talking with other staff members across the uni, essentially to be able to share the experience and to kind of pick up on what are the other strategies that people are engaging. There's a real sense of just not having the skills, perhaps even the understanding around help seeking. And particularly, we've mentioned it a few times around that concept of weakness. And just interested to hear from the panel. Again, just, absorbing different, perspectives. But when we talk about the thing that keeps you up at night, at the moment, that's probably my cohort that's kind of like the 3 a.m. wake-up call, particularly for those that are obviously still on campus, have experienced the isolation of living on resis sometimes, and being not able to necessarily just move to a common area and connect with people. But I suppose the protective factors that we can put in place for them, just interested.
So this is a very fundamental issue for our broader student community, but particularly for those different parts of our student community. We will be doing some work on this next year, particularly around how do we keep connected our international students, and there are all sorts of ways in which we can do that. We can do that on campus, but also off campus. So that's really fundamental, I think, that we're not just thinking about some of the responding to young kids in strife, but also thinking about how do we use social connectedness and to build wellbeing. So that's a really timely way for me to announce that initiative that we're going to be running next year. And Mel, thank you, you don't quite know about it yet. But the other thing that we're also doing some work around is around summer, and I might ask Tracy to just say a few words. We just started this work, but it would be important that we think about the January kind of December period.
Yes, no, we you know, it is a strange and different year. It's been a year where we've had to be very reactive by nature, but it is now a time when we're starting to think of a bit more broadly what, you know, things will look like at summer and in next year. And what we're trying to find to put together is a package for the summer period that is not, because really we'll be advising international students who are here in Australia that going home, you know, is obviously very attractive, but there will be difficulties getting back to Canberra or coming back to this home. But there's also, of course, other people in various situations, domestic students who may choose not to go home as well. So there will be more people here and perhaps not as many opportunities to travel around Australia and all these good things. So we're looking at it quite holistically. You know, what welfare support do we need to put in place and engagement activities? What courses we might be able to offer, accommodation options, but also looking at, you know, what broader community engagement we can do at ANU that might not only look after our students, but reach out into the community too. Volunteer work, these sort of things too. So it's very early days, but we are planning to put some comms out soon on this idea, and you know, domestic students, international, everybody could participate in this potentially.
It's great what you said about this idea of weakness, and I think that's a really, really important one, because our brains are really clever at, particularly when we're isolated, playing tricks on us and making us feel like we're the only ones who feel bad and we're the only ones who are failing and that we're not resilient and we're not coping, and everybody else out there seems to be coping well. So when we hear from leaders, when we hear from everybody around us, oh, actually I'm struggling a bit too, I'm finding this difficult, it gives us permission to feel like that as well, and it also just validates our experience. And to go back to your point, Brian, where you were saying about, but how do you do that in a way perhaps it doesn't create panic or doesn't make a problem exacerbated or worse? You know, interestingly, I think people are already feeling that way anyway. But then having permission to feel that way because somebody that they look up to is also feeling that way is a really important thing as well. So, yeah, it's a really, really important one, the being open and transparent about these things.
And it's really great to hear what is being investigated for summer, because at ANU Counselling, we're seeing students that this is their experience, and whether or not they would have liked to return home, wherever it is, international or somewhere else in Australia, to have the choice taken away means they're really limited around what they can do. And this is a really difficult time. They've been dealing with, especially if you're living on campus, many impacts, and to not know what the future is going to hold and to be really unsure about what are we going to be able to do through the summer and how do I cope with that and how do I connect with people. Everything is changing. So if we're able to be authentic and help people process that as we are, whether it's talking with a friend or with a counsellor too, that's going to make a difference.
Thanks. Looks like we've got a question at the back.
Probably more a comment following on from what Mel,
Great.
Lou and Andrew have just said. For those of who don't know me, I'm actually one of the staff advisors employed here. So my name's Maria. I'm a clinical psychologist as well. And I guess the main thing I wanted to, I think, pass on, just listening to some of the comments and everything we've talked about today, is that although the tips and strategies and how do we cope and the focus on how do we cope is excellent and wonderful, I think it's still important even now in October to kind of highlight the fact that it's okay to not be okay. And I think that it's this thing of us waiting for it to be better and waiting for it to get back to the normal and commenting on that it is the new normal. And I think, you know, for Brian and for Mel and staff and this kind of how do we cope, how do we get better, I think still even in this late stage, 7, 8, 9 months on, it's okay to say, actually, I'm not okay. So there's people that started out not okay in March and maybe are better. There's people that started out not okay, that are okay and now not coping. And so I think, interestingly enough, there is a conundrum that the longer it goes on, the more not okay it is. And I think as part of my role, I was interviewed probably in May for a webinar that was going to be put out. We talked a little bit about that, and it wasn't released. We thought maybe it was a bit, late in the game because the campus is reopening in June, and to now tell people that it's okay to not be okay is maybe a little bit late, and we'll just ignore that because things are going back to normal. And of course, it's very apparent that it's not, even though we're kind of doing a great job and people are moving forward. So this sense of, Teresa's comment that it's whiplash, I think it kind of ties into what's the support there and how do we access it. And I agree, ANU has some amazing support, both on campus and off campus. And I just wanted to highlight that that's still a really important conversation to have, and for people to feel validated in that feeling.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think there's also a lot of grief around as well, that hasn't been dealt with properly by people, and have stuck in various phases of grief, railing against the world, and it's really hard to be angry at a virus because it's not really going to fight back. But people are channeling that anger into unhelpful sort of directions and everything else. So, and that's okay as well. Grieving is perfectly normal. But there's also opportunities to help and get you past those moments into, gradually coming through that grief.
And I think it's also important to acknowledge that the last 12 months have been hard for lots of us, but there are a lot of people that before 12 months already were finding things really tough too, and this has probably just exacerbated already very difficult circumstances. So I think, echoing what Marari has said, please seek help if you need to.
Thanks, everyone. We're coming towards the end of our time, so I was just thinking it would be great if we could wrap up by going one more time through the panel with what you think has been sort of the best silver lining of 2020.
I think the benefit of being able to work from home and have flexible work arrangements, it's a blessing and a curse. I've had lots more time with family and been able to participate in things at home while working, but I like to be really boundary between work and everything else, and so that's a real struggle for me still.
I just think I've been incredibly impressed by how adaptable we are as a human race, really. I mean, we've been so adaptable in terms of, we face so many challenges, and it's not been without difficulty, huge amounts of difficulty, but, we've found workarounds, we've found ways to do things in different ways, and I think that's been really, really inspiring.
Sorry. I'm going to, just a message of hope. So I was listening to a lot of this conversation. This is not my first pandemic. I was, in 1983, a young man, came out right on the cusp of HIV/AIDS. So most of the young men that I knew in the gay world in the 80s has passed away. We did survive, we did survive, and we did thrive, and we moved through it. So that's exactly the same for you. So many of you are young. This will be probably the most confronting experience of your life to date. You will survive. You will survive, and we'll move through this, and we'll be together. So just a message of hope.
From a personal view, the pandemic brought me to work at ANU, and that's been a real positive. I'm really enjoying myself here and the ability to contribute to Australia's National University. On a broader picture, I think, for me, it's how we can learn from all of this to make a better world. That sounds a bit kumbaya, but there are some lessons that I think Mother Nature is trying to tell us. And if we can hold on to those lessons and learn from them and look at making post-pandemic a different world and a new normal, a sustainable new normal, then that will be worth most of the pain that we're going through at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you all for your breadth and depth of knowledge. I think you've summed it up quite well, that there's so much at the moment that's making us uncertain, and at the same time, so many opportunities to learn from that. So thank you for your knowledge that you've shared here today. I might hand over now to Professor Brian Schmidt to close.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, our panel, Brad, Andrew, Lou, Ian, Tracy, and of course, Therese on the big screen. It's been a really, for me personally, a great discussion because it's not a conversation I've had yet. And one of the great themes that I've heard is I've had my last 9 months played out in front of me, right? If I think about the novelty when we first started out of what was going on, it was kind of interesting and it wasn't all consuming. And I was like, wow, I can do all these things in Zoom and I can talk to people and do multi-time zone things, and this isn't bad. Now, I will be honest, in October, I really hate Zoom. And I was an early adopter of Zoom. The reason ANU had a Zoom account is because 3 years ago, I said, we need to have a Zoom account because I'm using this. So I'm an early tech adopter, okay? And I was back in February making fun of everyone because I knew all the tricks in Zoom and no one else did because I'd been using it for a long time. But it also invades your life. And one of the interesting things for me was when I started off in March using Zoom, it was great because I had a bit of time here and, you know, I'd go there and start my sourdough and, you know, pick the peas out in the garden. Now we're into it full on. And, you know, I had my last day working from home last week. I started at 7:30 in the morning, finished 7:30 in the evening, and I had 6 minutes for lunch, and that was it. It was Zoom the entire time. And I was so done at the end of it. I was like, I told my team, we just cannot do this to them anymore. Like, well, we gave you 15 minutes here and 15 minutes there, and I'm like, yeah, but they all got chewed up by things running over. And I was clapped out in a way I have never been clapped out in my life. And so that's where the normal being interesting has gotten quite problematic. One of the other things that I was going to ask, but the Vice Chancellor can only ask one question, and I'll just reflect a little bit on this, is we have a whole generation of students who have only interacted with this campus digitally. And I've always said, as a user of Zoom for 3 years, Zoom really good once you know someone. It kind of, you can reinforce a relationship. And I'm still trying to figure out how to make friends in a purely digital, build up relationships in a purely digital format. And the only way I've managed to do it, interestingly enough, is with a small group of people on Twitter who I've followed for about 7 or 8 years. And after 7 or 8 years, you kind of get to know them. But it takes 7 or 8 years. And then eventually when I meet them in person, it's kind of weird, I kind of know them. But it takes 7 or 8 years. And yet we have people who we need to try to get going in a couple weeks or months. And so Tracy and Ian, one of the things I'm hoping in our student accelerator and stuff as we think a little bit about is how can we build relationships up? Perhaps, or your work may be specifically about this. How do we build relationships up that are actually meaningful in a fully digital sense? You know, one of the things that we have done to help is open up a place in Shanghai, because we have a lot of students in China who just have not been able to get here. And I hope that that is an environment where they can actually, you know, get a cohort and have meaningful relationships there, and trying to figure out how we can extend that to other places. I think it's going to be important because, yeah, I'm sorry to say next year, the beginning of next year at least, is going to look a lot like this semester. Hopefully a few more Australians will be able to be here. But I don't see us being able to open up to all international students. I remain in hope, but not with absolute certainty, that things will start becoming more back to normal about a year from now, or a little less than that, but we shall have to see. But I think what I heard very importantly here today, which is conveniently aligned with my instinct, is we need to frame the future. We need to frame The present, it's okay. It's not always going to be great. And believe you me, I live every day having to think about how do I talk about in a positive view about the future when so many hard things are happening right now. And you just trying to do that is actually very challenging. But we do frame the future, and we don't take the present condition as the status quo, it's fine. It actually is, we really are thinking about how to make the current condition better and adapt so that it's not the new normal, actually, as we keep changing and keep working to make the new normal a bit better normal. But it's not perfect, and we know that. So thank you to our panel. As I said, I got a huge amount out of it, and I hope everyone who's been listening, both in the room and online, have been able to, I guess, see themselves in the conversations today, but also have a little bit of a framework for how to think about how to deal with today, tomorrow, but also think about the coming months and years, and how we will get through this, as Ian said at the end. We will. It's not ideal, but we will get through it. Thank you, everyone.